It is Christmas 1914. Europe is ablaze. The Entente and Central Powers are locked in combat. Soldiers sat in muddy, cold trenches a few yards away from the enemy. Any chance of attack was stopped by machine gun and artillery. It was horrible. And it was the First World War. People expected the war to be over by Christmas. Instead, it showed no sign of ending. Soldiers were bogged down in French mud, Russian snow, and many other types of terrain. It was a stalemate that never seemed to end. As Christmas approached, soldiers started to tire of the war and longed to go home and see their families. The generals, hoping to keep morale, allowed gifts and letters to be sent to the soldiers on the front. Soldiers received loads of care packages, with them normally containing cigars, writing sets, and much more. These care packages brought Christmas to the trenches. Morale was kept up, just as the generals hoped for, but not in the way they expected. Instead of a renewed interest in fighting, the troops were hoping for a peace, so they could return to their families. Soldiers were fed up of fighting, but what could they do to stop it? On Christmas Eve, German soldiers sang carols and placed small Christmas trees in their trenches. French and British soldiers heard the carols and started to sing their own. At first, it was sort of like a competition, but it quickly turned into a shared carol singing. Then, a soldier would shout to the opposing trench that tomorrow, if the opposition didn't shoot, they would not shoot. That night, soldiers went to bed without the fear of being shot. The next day, soldiers woke up to see their enemies standing in no man's land, the land between the trenches. They climbed out of their trenches to join them, partly in curiosity and also partly in brotherhood. While the Christmas truce was happening, the higher-ups of both sides were outraged and angry. They were desperate to stop the truce and wasted no time doing it. As soon as news arrived of a strange and unofficial truce to the High Command, the higher-ups immediately ordered that the truce was to be broken up, whatever the cost. The higher-ups threatened the troops with court-martial, an army version of the civil court. Higher-ups controlled the courts, however, and they were often corrupt, so a fair trial wasn't guaranteed. If you were found guilty, the punishment would most likely be death. Other punishments such as demotion and a ration cut existed, but they were hardly used as much as death. Death, although inhumane, was practical for the army, as it was easy to do. Demotion and ration cuts also had their downsides. The chances of getting your rank back after demotion were low, and a ration cut would make you weak and unfit for fighting, making death in battle more likely. They also resorted to more extreme measures. Some higher-ups ordered the shelling of areas where the truce was happening. This not only killed the enemy, however, it also killed their own troops. The higher-ups also tried to prevent the news of the truce from reaching their capitals and cities in their countries, but despite their best efforts, an event as big as the Christmas truce would never be able to be kept secret. News still managed to get to these places, and people became aware of its existence. However, after hours of shelling and threats of court-martial, one by one, sectors eventually called off the truce and headed back to their trenches to fight as enemies once more. Some sectors held out until New Year's Eve, but the ever-growing threat of demotion, trial, and being killed by a shell that was supposed to be on your side eventually made them call it off. Many troops were killed in the bombardments of shells trying to break the truce, many being killed by gunners that were supposed to be their comrades. When the Christmas of 1915 rolled around, the generals were taking no chances. The British ordered a 24-hour artillery bombardment of the German trenches, as well as drowning out of German carols with machine gun fire. They also court-martialed soldiers who tried to form a truce. But in 2015, historians discovered a diary from a World War I soldier providing details of a Christmas truce. In 1915, A private's diary explains how a ceasefire was held by some of the men, despite orders from the officers who did not want a repeat of the 1914 Christmas truce. This contradicts reports from the time which said a second truce did not take place. Perhaps this is what the higher-ups wanted people to think. After all, the French army mutinies were covered up with almost no trouble, so who knows?